Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to do a little pit stop from our card captors series. As you can see, all the display has been updated, but I want to take this time to do a separate tutorial on bows. I realized that in this series we're going to do a lot of bows and sometimes I yada yada through them, so I want to make this separate video. I think it'll be useful. A lot of my students always ask about bows, about ties, and about arm straps. There's always an arm strap involved somewhere, right? So let's go over those three things. So I pulled up an example of a bow that we're going to try to execute. And so when looking at a bow, you can start breaking it down into three parts. First part being this loop knot part, and then the second part being the loops on the side, and then the third part being the little ribbons that kind of tail off, right? So what I decided to do is I'm literally going to make these into three different pieces. Okay, so first things first, we're going to go into our simulation property. And by default, our gravity is at negative 9800. If you guys don't think you're going to remember that number, please write it down somewhere because we will eventually, inevitably, want our bow to be simmed in Earth, right? Okay, so that's the first thing that we do. We're going to zero out our gravity because for pieces like this, uh, if you notice bows, ties, they're kind of just like independent, right? It's not like their knot or something is getting affected by the clothing underneath, right? It's just kind of sitting on top. So in that way, in that logic, I try to make my bows separate away from my body and then I just kind of put it on like a sticker. So let's get into it. I'm just going to grab a little rectangle right here. No rhyme or reason, but I try to, I'm gonna actually minimize this guy since we're not gonna really look at it. I try to lean on the bigger side. I think this is a little too big for the example, but I try to lean a little bit bigger. Sometimes I understand some of you guys have bows that are really, really tiny and you're trying to like make a whole bow really tiny, but I really do recommend making it a little bit larger so that you can kind of figure out all your parts first and then you can downsize. Okay, so this guy, I'm going to pretty much make it my loop, my little knot in the middle, if you will. Okay, so with smaller pieces of fabric, I really highly recommend that the highest particle distance you go up to is 10, just because these guys, they don't have enough topology in them. And so they tend to be very faceted and kind of hard to work with. So the lower particle distance helps out in that regard. It helps give it a little bit more detail. I'm going to make a little internal line here. As you see, we have sewn it, but if we sim it like this, what will tend to happen is it'll just kind of smush on itself like that, right? So we don't really want that to happen like that, right? We kind of want to make sure that this guy is set up for success. So I'm just going to close this guy down like a book. And that way, this guy kind of has an easier journey, right? It doesn't need to figure out like how I'm going to smush down to connect with this guy. It's just kind of going to do it. Woohoo! So now that we have done that, I'm just going to go ahead and actually delete that internal line. I just needed it to fold over my guy. And we're going to make sure that this guy is relatively kind of, well, this is very strange angle, but we're going to kind of make this guy a little bit horizontal so that I can have like this back panel, if you will, exposed. Okay. And the next thing I'm going to do is make these nice vertical internal lines, kind of offset from the pattern edge right here. So as you see, there's an internal line right inside there. And this is where we're going to build our and sew our loops and our ribbons too. And the reason why we want it to be a little bit offset and more inside of this knot is because we want to give it that convincing look that there is fabric coming out of the loop, right? They're not neighbors, they're like overlapped, right? So we're gonna freeze this guy and boom, we already have our first part done, guys. Like, that was so easy, wasn't it? Second step is our loop. Okay, so no rhyme or reason, just gonna sew that bad boy on, right? And before I sim it, I'm always gonna try to help it out, right? And it looks like there's a little bit of a little crisscross, which I mean, I don't really care for, but we could just reverse it so it can have an easier time. And then I'm gonna try my best, guys, because it's a small piece of fabric that we're trying to shove a bunch of stuff into. So I'm always gonna like a little bit baby this bow and have it sew into itself like that. Woohoo! Oh, and then let's make this particle distance 10. Do you see how fast it is at particle distance 20? So 10 kind of smooths it out, and obviously the lower you go, the more detailed it'll be. Just something to note, you know, these guys are going to be very heavy, especially if you have more than one bow. So just be mindful of that and your file size, because yes, all of these guys most likely will be particle distance 5 to 10. And so that's very dense, slows down your machine, yada, yada, yada. So that's why it's always like something that I note and try to do in a separate file and just kind of add it in at the very end. All right, so let's do a little internal line here. And again, this is just so that I can use this tool in our 3D window to fold down our little pattern here. All right, just like so. I'm just helping it out. Awesome. Then once it's at its place, we could delete that internal line. And we're just gonna have this guy sim. And I know you guys are probably thinking this is a very small loop. But yeah, again, guys, when establishing very complex shapes, I really try to use the smallest amount of fabric that I can get away with. Because now that the hard part's done, right, it moving to the location it needs to go to, I could just simply, you know, salt to taste, right? Make this guy larger, make this guy smaller, what have you, right? I can even just uniformly keep on scaling it. And as you see, I'm doing it little by little, and that's just so that MD can have time to adjust. It like wants to roll in, but I think it's because of the curve of this guy. Okay, so if that's the case, no worries. We'll just adjust that as we go, no problem. I'm just gonna keep on going. Oh. Let's help it out. So that's why this loop in the middle, I tend to make it a little bit bigger. Most of the time I actually end up using that space, but because if you make this loop too small, it'll be just so hard to work in this space. So that's why it's always nice to have ample room in there. Don't be shy. Alright, let me grab this guy. And then get this fold angle right here. And I just want to make sure that this guy is just behaving properly. Alright. I can easily do that just because we are at 0 gravity. So it's just kind of floating around and not being aggressive. That is exactly the situation that I want. Alright, and then we're just going to slowly keep on expanding. Right? There's no rhyme or reason. We're just salting to taste to a point where I like it, right? This is when you guys will match to your concept, what have you, right? But just keep on going little by little. I really highly recommend little by little because it allows Marvelous Designer to just kind of update itself little by little, you know, instead of getting really overwhelmed, right? We're just trying to avoid the drama, if you will. Okay, so I'm pretty satisfied with this, and I actually think we can afford our knot to be a little smaller. And see, this is why this 3-part kind of way of working is so much better, because you're not relying on the success of the previous step below, if that makes sense. Like, I know in the other bow tutorials that I've seen on YouTube, it's kind of like a lot of pinning and then rolling the piece of fabric over and then pinning that, but then it's kind of jittering and then it might work itself out. And then you're kind of starting from square one a lot, right? Or at least when I was doing those tutorials, it felt like that very much. So this way, it's kind of like you can kind of build this guy up very quickly and adjust it accordingly. All right, so now that I have my loop and I'm pretty satisfied with the length of it, I'm going to go ahead and grab this bow that we just made, or the loop, sorry. And I'm gonna use this guy to be our little tail. What's great about this guy is we can start it very small, and then once again, salt to taste. So I'm actually gonna go ahead and shimmy this guy forward so that this guy can sit behind. And again, that is just a creative choice. It's not really for anything other than just because I want this ribbon in the backside. Most ribbons that I see have that, but maybe in your concept it's reverse. So do what you guys feel like is appropriate. And just like the loop below, or sorry, above, I'm just shimmying this guy into its place so that it just doesn't need to freak out as much, right? We just want this guy to have a good time in that schmoshration. We're just gonna shimmy this guy forward a little bit. It's like musical chairs a little bit, but that way we can guarantee le bon. And then there's a brainless, guys. Salt to taste. What's the length of your ribbon? Right? Well, I'm not worried about, you know, how it's falling. Right now it's 0 degrees. 0 degrees? 0 gravity. And so I'm just trying to get the parts in, right? Boom. Once you have the parts in, that's when the fun can happen. So you can unstrengthen the back guy and have it just kind of, well, it's not going to do that because, again, we're at 0 gravity. But we have this ribbon guy. Then we have this loop. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and Control D this. So that's another amazing thing. We just duplicated this guy, so all that hard work that we just did, we don't need to do it again. Isn't that exciting? So in this one, I'll do the reverse where the ribbon is on top. There we go. Okay. All right, so we have the ribbon going forward in this one, and then the ribbon going backwards. Cool. So now that we have all of our parts here, this is a good time to kind of sew it to wherever it needs to go. So say I just want to put a ribbon right here. I'm going to make some internal lines on our pattern here. I don't know why it's intersecting. All right. And then we're going to go ahead, and before we sew this guy on, I want to make some internal lines that can get sewn on. Woohoo! So we're just going to do like that. No rhyme or reason. I just want it to be offset from our internal lines. You don't want these internal lines to necessarily be overlapping each other, just because it kind of complicates your sewing relationships and then therefore slows down your sim a little bit. So definitely don't want to do that. Alright. So now that we have all of our parts sewn on, just like our loops, if you will, I'm just gonna shimmy everybody over because I'm just trying to make sure that everyone has a little distance to go, right? This is not for, you know, like I'm not trying to pull it from like a mile away, right? I'm just trying to treat it like a princess, if you will. All right, and I'm just double checking that this has enough fabric for it to sew onto like this distance, if that makes sense. And that way it just kind of, you know, sits nice and not stretched out, because you don't want that small little loop that's literally attached to everything to be having tension, because then that'll just mess up all of your sewing relationships. Okay, and we're just going to sew that on. Beautiful. So now that our bow is in its place, we're going to right click on our empty 3D space here and do simulation properties. And then we're going to just change our gravity back into negative 9800. Okay. And this will just relax everyone. Relax. Relax. Okay. So as I look at this guy, first thing I will do is actually I'm going to right click on this guy and do add point to pattern outline. Just because I'm lazy, I just want to get the points here and delete the internal lines, because obviously you saw how kind of pointy those that that loop was, right? It's just not accurate to a ribbon loop, right? It's very rare for it to be like almost like a pleat, that sharp of a fold. And then we're going to go ahead and unstrengthen our ribbon here just so that they can all relax. Relax. I'm going to move our tail, if you will, to the back side. The reason for that is because I don't want it kind of looked ugly. I wanted to show you an example of what it looked like forward, but I think if I do one forward, one backwards, it kind of looks ugly. Sorry, guys. And let's address some things, okay? So these are kind of like the last ones I'm going to address. I noticed that our loop is a little bit large, right? We kind of see like a lot of holes and gaps in our loop. So I'm just going to simply shrink it a little and see if that gives it a little bit more of that tension that we need from the center loop. And I do think it's getting better. A little bit more, just to keep it taut, and I think that's a good spot. And then the next thing that I notice about our bow is just these loops aren't really giving us that kind of like it's coming from a small space and then kind of flowering out, if you will. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use these points to just make the outer part, the apex, if you will, a little bit wider than the rest of the ribbon. And that's just so that we can really convince the audience that this is a real bow. I'm a real bow. So yeah, I'm just gonna make it wide, baby. And now you can really see it kind of like flowering out. I know that's a weird phrase, but it has that nice little taper, right? It feels like it's like all coming together here and then kind of blossoming out, if you will. So now that I like the amount, right, the width of this, I'm going to go ahead and just kind of curve this guy out so it doesn't look so sharp, right? We want it to feel like a regular ribbon, right? Obviously our ribbon's not going to look like this. It's just going to look like a strap, but you know, in 3D land, this is what we gotta do. Okay. So boom, that's pretty convincing. Yeah, and we're gonna freeze that, and let's just update our ribbons just a little bit. I think they're kind of low poly, like here especially. So I'm just gonna relax that, relax it. Okay, and the next thing that I'll do is actually I'm going to widen our guy for the same reason. I just want it to feel like there's, you know, a scrunch of fabric here and then it like tapers wider. I think it just looks appealing, but again, you guys make these decisions according to your concepts. And the next thing that I would like to do is I'm going to pull this guy down. And the reason for that is so that it gives it that nice cut, that diagonal cut that we sometimes see with bows. Again, this is something that you'll tailor to your concepts, all right? And there you have it. Nice little bow. And I know some people might be like, oh, but how do I get some of the folds here so that it feels more convincing? Well, you're in luck. Another easy little adjustment. We're going to do a layer clone on top. We're going to remove the linked editing from the layer below. And we're going to link it back to itself. Voila. So now we have this guy. Open this. Oh, you know what? I kind of want to hold this guy, the layer below. I want to freeze the layer below. Just so that this guy updates to that shape and doesn't drag it down. As you saw when I simmed it with the layer, with another extra layer of clothing, it like kind of went down. I don't want that. I want it to stay intact. So boom, we have this guy now. And this is the guy that we will simply manipulate. And honestly, for me, I actually just manipulate the front side of our bow. I actually don't use a lot of adjustments for our back because one, we're just never gonna see that inside part right here, right? So it's not essential that we get more topology into that area, right? We're trying to somewhat optimize, right? So what I'm going to do now is I'm just gonna expand. I'm just gonna widen our ribbon size, if you will. and give it that nice offset. And obviously we're not really going to see from this, so I'm going to walk it down to particle distance 5. But now we are starting to see those nice gatherings right here. Right here. It's a little tricky, right? Like, you know, I kind of do, depending on the ribbon, right? But I'll do something like this. Like I'll pull it in so that, do you see how before that internal line? Okay. Is here right at the edge, but I kind of want it to be hidden, if you will. And basically I'm just going to sew it on to our layer below. I'm just going to make sure that it's in the relatively the same spot. And we're just going to sew that guy down. And what this will do is it'll help kind of gather everyone in the middle, if you will. You see how before it was kind of drooping, right? But now it's starting to gather real nicely. And I'll even kind of, I'll raise my internal line a little bit so that it just kind of goes a little bit more evenly throughout. And this is where you will start salting to taste, right? Like this is when you'll see your concept and match it accordingly. But this is the start of how you get those nice little micro folds, if you will, here, so that it feels like there's more tension without losing the general shape and volume of your bow. So yeah, this is how I use my layer clones. And this is how we get our bow. So if I unfreeze everybody on strengthen, and then let's just assign it a different color so that you guys can see bow. Let's just do like a cute. Just trying to pick a color where you guys can see the folds. But yeah, that would be your cute little bow. And what's so amazing about a bow like this is that it's much easier to art direct. You know, if you have a lead or a director coming to you and saying, hey, I don't really like how the, you know, can you make the, like the tails of them a little longer and the loop a little bigger? Imagine trying to do that like with the pinning and simming method, right? I would literally lose my mind. But the notes that are given usually are like, oh, we want this guy to be a little bit more voluminous. Can you make it a little bit bigger? Okay, no problem, right? So I highly recommend trying out this method, okay? The next part we will do is the tie. Same thing. When it comes to ties, I feel like I could break it down into two parts, which is the part that goes into the knot itself, and then the tail. I know, these phrases I should really learn. This year, I'm going to learn more fashion terms, but for now, this will do. Alright, so let's do, just like our bow, let's start with our little knot part first. Alright. And again, we're just going to walk this guy down to particle distance 10 so that it's a little bit more malleable, if you will. We're just going to go ahead and I'm just trying to think. Yeah, I think I want it horizontal. We're going to do the same thing where we just put in a little internal line here, and then we're just going to fold it down on itself so that it just has an easier time to loop on its own. Boom. Okay, period. Let's do strengthen so that it just stays a little bit stiffer. I like using strengthen a lot when I'm building out stuff because it's just a little bit easier to manage a stiffer shape rather than kind of like a flimsier material, if you will. Alright, so boom, we already did kind of the hard part, which is the knot. And then we're going to add two little lines for our little neck wrap part, if you will. Okay. And then this one's even easier because we just have to put another internal line at the bottom for it to all settle in. Oopsies. So boom. Copy, paste. And we're just going to delete all these internal lines. And I'll just rotate it so that it's not as confusing. But yeah, this guy is going to be the guy that we sew into this guy. So I'm just going to do 1.92 to just match this line. It's really no reason for that other than I drew it and I feel like that's enough. I'm going to get rid of that relationship where it loops onto itself. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong guy. Okay, cool. I was like, why does it look so strange? Alright, so we're just gonna have this guy sit. And once again, we're just shimmying it so that it sews inside, right? And for just visual, I'm just going to flip it over. Cool. So this is our tie. Now let's do that thing where we just wrap it around. I'm going to just go intuitively and we're just going to make a little like turtleneck situation, if you will. For me, I feel like getting it wrapped around the neck, we can do without our parts here. And then we could add this guy, kind of like what we did with our bow. We're just going to add it on top of this little loop. Alright, so I'm just going to copy paste, mainly because I'm lazy, but also because I just need one guy in the back here and one guy in the front. Okay. And then we're just gonna sew. Make a little turtleneck situ. Oopsies. Oh, I think because of the hair. Alright, so that's let's just delete. Oh, my bad. Delete accessory. There we go. I think the hair was pushing it down, but nevertheless, very good. Okay. So basically, you know, obviously if you have a collar or something, you're going to tuck everything below. But what I like to do is say that this is my collar, if you will, right? And then there's like that other piece of fabric that folds over. I would cut the part that folds over and deactivate and hide it so that I could just work with this guy. And what I'll use is I'm going to do another copy paste. I'm going to use this like turtleneck situ to build out my little tie, if you will. Just bear with me as I get you guys to where you need to be. So now we have these two kind of like lacy bits, if you will. We're going with it. I'm committing. I'm just gonna flip the normal. It's purely just visual. It's no big deal. And let me just find the ends of everyone and just make it a little shorter. We don't need all this fabric. All right, and then we're gonna go ahead and go into our simulation properties again and bring back our gravity. Where you going, dude? All right, and it's fine. Let's just move our guy over here to where it needs to be. I'm gonna go ahead and let's deactivate our bow so our tie doesn't get all weirded out by that huge piece of fabric in the way. And once again, I'm just trying my best to shimmy this guy over to where it needs to be, right? I'm not trying to, you know, make it do a lot more work than it needs to. Something like that. All right, and it looks like these guys need to be way longer. So maybe reducing it wasn't the right move, but nevertheless, we're gonna go ahead and sew this guy down. Let me just sim it, because I just need to have this guy figure itself out. Okay, so looks like we flippity dipped the ribbons to its proper owner. Yes, and looks like this is the guy with the twist, so we're just gonna reverse this. Alright, awesome. Well, I just twisted it again, but okay, let's just help it. There we go. All right, so I'm gonna move these guys deeper in so that it's, even more convincing that, there's stuff going into that loop, right? And this is where we will already salt to taste. We're just gonna reduce the length so that it feels nice and taut, right? We don't want this to look like it's loosey-goosey around an egg, right? And maybe, yeah, let's lower that particle distance because it's fast-setting like a lot. And another thing for the reason, not only because it looks ugly, but it's also because if you're trying to do a lot of intricate things, which we are, with small pieces of fabric, you kind of want a higher number of topology, more high-res topology, because there's just not enough surface area, if you will. So to combat that, if you will, we just need to make sure that it's dense enough. I'm putting it at an angle because you see how it kind of does this weird thing. So I just want it to sit a little bit more flesh. And already I saw that guy kind of feeling a little bit more taut. So that's letting me know that that angle is probably the right decision. And I'm just making it taut enough, right? I don't want it to feel like it's stretching. I just want it to sit a little bit easier than it was prior. So something like this, I would angle this guy, right? So that it feels a little straighter and doesn't feel so like bunching up at that edge. We're just gonna make this a little shorter. Again, same reasoning. We're just trying to get this guy to fit a little bit more snug. All right. It's really jittering over here. So that's a little bit concerning to me. So what I'm going to do is just push it a little bit closer to the middle. That way it's not just like hitting that edge so much. Okay, so that feels a lot better. Cool. There's really no like funny, weird things that I have to do with this tie. It is just tying up. And then obviously with our ties, match, pick and choose whatever tie you want, right? That's appropriate for your concept. And for me, I think I'm going to make this guy a little bit wider. To be honest, it looks like it can totally afford a little bit more width. So I made this guy just a little bit wider because the same reasoning as the bow, we don't want it to feel like it's a skinny ribbon coming out of a loop. It just doesn't look natural, right? We want it to feel like it's kind of bunched up at where the knot is and then tapers outwards, right? Again, this is where you will just match your concept. But for me, I'm just winging it and just making a tie out of this guy. Shablam! And same thing. So say you're very satisfied with this whole situation, right? Then what I would do is I would do another layer clone on top of this guy and remove linked editing. And we're going to go ahead and, oh, actually with this one, I only want this top part to stretch and have an offset. So I'm going to change the length to like 4. Something where it's just clearly going to have enough offsets so that it wrinkles just like that. Perfect. I'm going to walk it down to 5 so that we can really see what the wrinkles are looking like. All right, and then, yeah, I mean, have at it, guys. This is the layer on top, so just, do your desire, if you will, right? And then this is where you can start dialing it in. Like, say, I don't really like that the fabric, like the folds are so long, and kind of gives the impression that it's like a wobbly, thin tie, which is not the case. So I'm just going to taper in. I know this looks weird, but I'm just tapering in where I don't want, like I want this guy to not have that wrinkle coming in. If that makes sense. Like, basically I just want the offset up in this area and everywhere else to feel very flush. Right? And so you get something like this. Alright, and then I know this looks really funny, but basically what I'm trying to say is, let me do something like, let me just quickly put in colors so that you guys can see that I'm not going crazy. Copy paste. These are like the worst colors ever, but I think you guys understand what I'm trying to get at. I'm just trying to visually help this guy out so that you guys can see what it would potentially look like underneath a collar. All right, and then, you know, just forget this gap. Does that make sense, guys? Cool. So this is our, let me move this guy. This is our, more or less, our tie. All right, so this would be our little tie. Right? Isn't that so much easier than those tutorials where they're pinning and simming? No hate on that, because at the time I was like, really don't know how else I would do this unless, you know, you're pinning and simming, pinning and simming. But, you know, once I started getting client feedback where they're like, and it's always the ties and the bows that they're like, oh, can you do that? Can you do that? And you're like, how am I gonna do that again? This time, you know, a lot of the notes is always like, can you make the tail just a little longer? Or, oh, can you make this tie like a little skinnier? Like, these are simple notes when you have it in this format, but when you're doing it the other method of the pinning and simming, pinning, simming, I wouldn't know how to walk it back. Okay, last but not least, we're going to go and address our armbands. Okay, so let me bring up our bow, and I'm just gonna shimmy this guy down over here. And we're just gonna, for the rest of the tutorial, just see it, just because I would like for you guys to look at it as well for all the things that we've done. Okay, so armbands are very overcomplicated, I think. I think a lot of students feel like they have to, you know, really just like wrap a piece of fabric around. And I highly advise against that, because that sounds like a really terrible Saturday, if you ask me. Another way of getting armbands is, let's just do a bigger piece of fabric. Ooh, maybe not that big. Oopsies. Something, basically I just want to get around the forearm area. And let's do arrangement points. If you need a little bit more of a stronger build, this is how I would advise doing armbands. So I'm going to have this guy, right? And if you have a sleeve, work off of your sleeve. Oops, I think I made that guy too big. So let me make it a little smaller so it's not falling off. Awesome. And I'm just going to make it as, you know, I want it to be pretty fitted. So let's do change length. Let's do something like 20 and see where we're at. So I want it to be tapered so that it feels, I'm going to go ahead and do offset internal line 50, that's fine. And we're going to do a cut and sew. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to freeze this guy so it doesn't want to fall down. It has a tendency to do that so far. So I'm going to do that while I'm adjusting this bottom part of the sleeve so that I don't need to worry so much about, you know, this guy falling down while I'm adjusting the, right? And I'm just going to make sure that it clears the wrist here. We want these guys to be sitting pretty like right on that wrist, right? We don't want it to kind of curl into our hand. Okay, and then in this case, super easy, guys. We're just gonna go ahead and get into our 3D edit line tool. So we're gonna do edit pen for garment. And you know, what's the phrase? Bob's your uncle? I never understood that, but Bob's your uncle. We are just gonna draw a beautiful line. You know, we're just gonna draw our lovely little armbands manually. You know, not doing the best job right now, but I just want to do this very quickly. All right, so now that we are back, let's just figure out what the hell this is. So with our 3D pen tool, after you are done making your armbands, and hopefully you'll take a little bit more time than I did, you're going to start seeing these gray lines appear in your 2D window. And that is what you'll use for your internal lines to make these cuts. Right, so again, I'm going to rush through this for the sake of time, but you guys should definitely take time. And as you can see, I'm not too accurate with, I'm not trying to do one for one of our outline, just because they tend to be very kind of wobbly, so I'm just trying to clean it up. But the one that I am trying to keep pretty loyal is the edges here, because I've made it a point where I had them connect. So I know that those guys are going to connect and be nice and convincing for me. Alright. And then now, once you are done outlining everything, we're just gonna grab all of our edit lines, if you will, on our 3D space and just delete them all, guys. The reason being is because these guys tend to really slow down your machine as you are simming, and pretty much we're done with them anyway because we have our internal lines here. So really no point in having them anymore. Alright, and I'm just gonna make sure that this guy, everything is extended to where they need to be. Right, we need these guys all hitting an edge or pattern outline. And we're just gonna go ahead and do cuts. Yeah, baby. We're gonna do cut. And cut. Alright, and this is where you'll come in and decide which ones you're going to use. I'm gonna use these. Okay. And just checking out. Oh, I guess I'm missing this guy. Okay. Bring it back. Okay, I'll just wing it. It's fine. So basically, I'm gonna sew these guys down to their respective patterns, if you will, kind of like this, so that it kind of goes over and under. And then everyone else, I think, is good to go. Alright, so this would be another method of getting armbands, and I feel like this was a little bit easier to do just because now we have that already fitted onto the arm, right? So we don't need to worry about does this length work or whatever. But there's these moments, right, where it kind of literally looks like it's getting sewn onto the pattern next to it, which is literally what's happening, so that's totally normal. But what we can do to make it more convincing is do an offset of the pattern outline. Let's do 0.5, that's totally fine. Make sure to create an internal line. And I'm just going to go ahead and just kind of pretty up this shape a little bit so that it feels like, you know, it's continuous. And then instead of sewing it to the edge here, we're just going to offset it and sew it to the inside. Kind of like the same concept that we're doing with our bow, right? Where we're like sewing everything inside of the knot. So same concept, guys. Something like that. And offset internal line. I mean a pattern outline. Delete that relationship. And just sew it into its internal line. Ooh. Let's freeze as much as we can so that it's all not like sprawling around. Yep, that's an actual term. I'm gonna do my best to kind of shimmy this guy forward a little bit so it finds itself. Ah, I see. We have like a really high particle distance. I'm gonna actually walk these guys down to like, I might even do like 5 if needed. But boom! if we turn off our internal lines, you could tell like they are definitely looking like they're overlapping. So this is a nice easy thing that I do to kind of just make sure that our arm straps look like they are, convincing. They're like wrapping around each other. They're not wrapping around each other, but this is so that we can use pretty much the least amount of fabric required for something like this. But also not have such a headache with so many moving parts, right? Things like this can get very overwhelming very quickly, but I think if you do it in this way, it'll help kind of, control it better, right? And then you won't risk kind of ruining everything, right? If you mess up this area, well, at least you still have this top area here. All right, so that is how I would do an armband. All right, so let's check it all out. So beautiful. All right, we have our beautiful armbands. We have our lovely little tie right here. Oh, lovely little tie right here. And who can forget our beautiful bow here. So yeah, if you guys learned anything, make sure to like and subscribe. I'm currently doing a card captors series where I try to do as many outfits as I can from that series. If you guys want to join on that, check out my videos. And if not, feel free just to ask me any Marvelous Designer tips and tricks because I'm always willing to share. All right, that's all for now. See ya!